All right. Well, welcome everybody once again to our monthly lecture for the month of March. It felt today like spring had definitely arrived a couple of weeks early on us. I think we set some records today. But this really officially is the last lecture of the winter. I'm pleased to announce we've been renewed for another quarter, though, which means which is a slightly self-serving way of saying I got more stuff I want to talk about. So we are going to do 3 more lectures. We're going to do April, May, and June at least, and then we'll see where it goes from there. So welcome once again. Our topic tonight is William Bradford and John Winthrop. And just by way of background, of course, this lecture series is sponsored by the Francis Schaeffer Study Center, which was founded in 2004. Our mission is to promote a biblical worldview through the study of history, literature, and art. And we have taken for ourselves the name of the influential theologian and apologist Francis Schaeffer. In addition to sponsoring this lecture series, Schaeffer Study Center offers a high school program which is built around an integrated chronological study of Western Civ, beginning in the ancient world in 9th grade, finishing with the 20th century in 12th grade. And we are now accepting applications for next fall. So if you head to our website, you can get further information and download an application if you have a student that you think might be interested. Or if you know of a student who you think might be interested, send them our way. Yeah, this is me. My darling bride is back there in the back. Married for 47 years, 12 children, 21 grandchildren, and a list of various things I've been caught doing over the years. And I haven't quite decided what I want to be when I grow up. So there's that. I'm a teacher. I teach. My wife and I are the directors of the Francis Schaeffer Study Center. I teach history. She teaches literature. And every now and then I take students on trips to visit historic places. Usually we go to Italy and Germany. This is a picture from a few years ago. We were visiting Rome and made our way into the papal apartments. These are the frescoes that adorned the papal library, painted by Raphael. And that's me in the red hat explaining all of it to my students. You go out the door, down the hall, and then you enter the Sistine Chapel. So it's a pretty spectacular day. So, as is my wont, help me get started. What's one thing you already know about the Pilgrims and the Puritans?
Didn't like it in England.
They didn't like it in England.
Looking for religious freedom.
Looking for religious freedom.
They felt God's call to leave and go.
They felt God's call to leave England and go to the New World. That's true. All of that is true. All right. I wonder where we're going to start then. I'm going to rely heavily on these 2 books, which are on the right-hand side of the table. In my book, these are recent, 1998, 2009. But there are biographies that go back from earlier years. The thing that distinguishes both of these is that they take a great deal of care to situate both these men as Englishmen. They talk about their birth and their education and the circumstances that they found themselves in as they were growing up, the things that led them to make that decision to leave England and cross the Atlantic. So if you want more information, these are both excellent. Gary Schmitz from Calvin College and Francis Bremer from Millersville University. And just to kind of do a spoiler here at the beginning, Bradford was part of the Pilgrim migration in 1620. He was not yet their leader. 101 colonists left England on the Mayflower, and they founded the settlement of Plymouth. 1 died on the way across the Atlantic, so 100 made it to this shore. 35 more came in 1621. Another 25 came in 1622. 96 in 1623. And the Mayflower made a return trip in 1629. So by 1630, Plymouth had a population of about 300. By 1640, the population had grown to about 600. So on the right-hand side, we've got Winthrop. John Winthrop, from a different part of England, led the great Puritan fleet in 1630. So 10 years after Bradford, this is a second distinct group with a different charter for a different part of Massachusetts. He had somewhere between 700 and 1,000 colonists on 11 ships. And in distinction to the Mayflower, which was paid for by a financier who wanted to be paid back by shipments of timber and furs from the Pilgrims, the Winthrop fleet had raised the money themselves. They were more well-to-do. They had sold their land and possessions in England, and they were self-financing, and they had a charter that guaranteed that the colony would be governed by those who lived in it. The Pilgrims Charter didn't guarantee them that. Over the next 10 years, between 1630 and 1640, there's what's called the Great Puritan Migration. 12,000 additional Puritans crossed the Atlantic to Massachusetts, and by 1640, Boston and the surrounding towns had a population of about 15,000. So, 600, 15,000. We'll talk about what that meant. I'll give you a little epilogue at the end that explains what happened. So, the background. I want to talk a bit about the experiences of these two men as they were growing up, what happened to them in their youth, and what prompted them to make the decision to leave England. And it really stems from the facts of England's Reformation. For both the Pilgrims and the Puritans, they viewed the English Reformation as incomplete. Henry VIII had broken with the papacy. Parliament had passed a law declaring that the Archbishop of Canterbury was the last court you could appeal to for any court decision. And then they passed a law declaring that the king was the head of the Church of England. By the way, that's still the case. Charles III, king currently, officially appoints all the bishops in the English church. He is still officially the head of the church. So you have to go back to Henry VIII to explain this incomplete Reformation. And then you have to look at Henry's children. The next three monarchs of England were the children of Henry VIII, Edward, Mary, Elizabeth. And really, there's no way to do this without doing a genealogical chart. And I know this is where people's eyes start to glaze over a little bit, but I'll try and simplify this. This is everything on this first page, but I'm going to take parts of it away. So Henry VII is the Tudor nobleman who ended the Civil War, the War of the Roses. He defeated Richard III, killed him on the battlefield, married the surviving Yorkish princess. He's Lancaster, so Lancaster and York then are united, and the Civil War comes to an end. Henry VIII is his son, although, Henry VIII is the son of Henry VII, surprise. There had been an older brother, Arthur. Arthur was going to be king. You know, it would have been interesting if we'd had another King Arthur, but he was going to be king. He was Henry's older brother. Henry was actually destined for a career in the church. Henry was going to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. Arthur was going to be the king, but Arthur died. And Henry inherited Arthur's wife. He had been married, and now there's a widow, and she had a dowry. She was a Spanish princess. They didn't want to send the dowry back. So that's Catherine of Aragon, right there next to him. She married Henry. After they'd been married for, I think, 15 years, they had only one surviving child and no sons. And Henry VIII began to be convinced that his marriage was cursed because he had married his brother's widow. There is a passage in Deuteronomy that says, "He who marries his brother's widow shall be cursed and shall be childless." Henry said, "I've made a terrible mistake." He had to get an exception from the Pope because it also violated canon law to marry your brother's widow. And he said, the Pope never should have granted it. I need to get that reversed. I need to have that marriage declared invalid so that I can marry again. And of course, he already had his eyes on Anne Boleyn. But let me simplify this. Cut to the chase. You kind of know the story. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. But there's three kids by three different mothers. There is a son, finally. The youngest of the three children of Henry is the son, Edward VI, and he succeeds. By the terms of Henry's will, he succeeds. And he's staunchly Protestant. And he is surrounded by Henry's more Protestant advisors. But he's not well. He reaches his early 20s and then dies, probably of consumption. And the terms of Henry's will were that if Edward died without an heir, then the next in line of succession would be the older of his two daughters, Mary. Her mother was the Spanish princess. She was staunchly Catholic. She didn't recognize the dissolution and the annulment of the marriage, and she took all of England back into the Catholic Church. She had the bishops deposed and arrested. She had the Archbishop of Canterbury, who had led the church under Henry VIII. She had him tried for heresy and treason and burned at the stake. So she earns the nickname Bloody Mary. But she doesn't reign very long. Oh, by the way, she marries the King of Spain. They don't have any children. She dies in 1558, and the last surviving child of Henry VIII, Elizabeth, comes to the throne. She is only 25 years old when she's crowned monarch. And people didn't know what to expect. People didn't have much in the way of high hopes. The Protestants hoped that she would complete and extend the Reformation that had been begun but only halfway completed by her father. Everything was up in the air. There were a bunch of English exiles in Geneva who had fled during the reign of Bloody Mary. They had printed an English Bible called the Geneva Bible. Remember, many moons ago, I came and brought and showed you pictures of that. So there were a group of followers of John Calvin who are now coming back to England and hoping that Elizabeth will do a more thoroughgoing reformation of the Church of England. Above all, they kind of hope she will abolish the whole episcopal rule of bishops and move to congregational control, as was done in Geneva and as had been done in the Reformation in Scotland. They were disappointed. So, yeah, there we go. Edward, then Mary, then Elizabeth. Elizabeth winds up ruling. She is actually, until we get to Victoria and Elizabeth II, she's the longest ruling monarch of England. She rules until 1603. So 45 years she is queen, and she never marries. She has 3 or 4 different courtiers, including a French prince, whom she nicknamed her French frog, but never married. And when she dies, she is succeeded by another descendant of Henry VII. He's a Tudor, but he'd grown up in Scotland and had fought with the Scottish Church all of his life. His mother had actually fled when he was an infant. He was a ward of a succession of noblemen who kept fighting and killing each other. He grew up in a very turbulent circumstance, but he was a Protestant. He just didn't like the Scots Presbytery. He didn't much like John Knox.
And he only lived to be 20-something.
Oh, no, that he ruled. Yeah, no, he'd already been king of Scotland for 20 years when he became king. So he ruled for...
Ruling year.
Those are his ruling years. Yeah, he's king of England for 22 years. He'd already been king of Scotland for 20-something years. And they're 2 different kingdoms. They're not united. So he has 2 crowns and 2 kingdoms, and they're completely separate. Yeah. James VI of Scotland, James I of England. Same guy. So the Puritans, the Calvinists in the Church of England, were reasonably excited about the prospects of James coming to the throne. They're going, okay, now we got our chance. Now we can complete the incomplete Reformation of the church. Yeah, 1567 to 1625 are his days. He was actually 33 years old, or 36 years old when he became King of England. Grandson of Henry VII, nephew to Henry VIII, cousin to Elizabeth, and there are a couple of reasons why the Protestants had high hopes. He had married a Protestant princess from Denmark. The Danish church had gone Lutheran. And Princess Anne of Denmark, they had kind of a storybook courtship and marriage. But he really disliked the Scots Presbytery. He supported church rule by bishops, and he wanted uniformity. And he was approached by reformers just after he came south and was crowned king. They presented a petition to him signed by 1,000 ministers requesting changes. Among them would be to abolish all of the bishoprics, to simplify the liturgy. The Church of England's liturgy, the Book of Common Prayer, they thought was still too close to the Roman Catholic Mass, and to allow more preaching. James said, nope, no bishop, no king. He did, however, say, yeah, we'll do a new translation of the Bible, because he really disliked the Geneva Bible. The Geneva Bible had marginal notes in it. And especially on places like Daniel and in Exodus, the midwives disobeying Pharaoh, there was a defense of the right of disobedience to tyrannical kings. And he hated that was in the Bible because they had been using it against him in Scotland. So he said, yeah, let's do a new translation. No marginal notes this time. So they did. It's 90% word for word the same as the Geneva Bible. It just doesn't have any marginal notes. So the king approved. And he refused to abolish the bishops. He refused to simplify the liturgy of the services. And he said, I demand conformity. And he was told, well, some of the pastors in some of the parishes around England aren't going to conform. And he says, they will conform, or I will harry them out of the land. So there's a very real sense in which the Pilgrims didn't just make a decision like, well, we think we might be happier somewhere else. It was like, no, the king is telling us we have to conform or leave, which is why they did. From 1604 to 1625, those who would not conform and comply wound up being persecuted by royal officials. Puritans refused to comply with high church Anglican practices, wearing the vestments, using the Book of Common Prayer. They were fined, they were imprisoned, their ministers were silenced. The canons of 1604 enforced conformity. So some of the Pilgrims, I guess pilgrim is the right word to use now. Pilgrim and Puritan is kind of interchangeable, but there's a distinguishment here. The Puritans stayed within the Church of England trying to complete the Reformation. The Pilgrims, by the end of James's rule, had decided that was a lost cause. And so they began to separate from the Church of England. It's hard for us to get our heads wrapped around the level of conformity that was enforced, because, we think of American small towns which have, a little town square and there's a church on every corner and you can pick the flavor you like the best. In England, every parish has one church. And depending upon where you live within the geographical boundaries of a parish. And whatever parish boundaries you live inside of, that's your church. So to not go to that church actually could subject you to fines. The Pilgrims started meeting secretly on various estates, and that's the community that William Bradford finds himself in. He's born in 1590, so about halfway through Elizabeth's reign, and 13 years before James comes to the throne. Little town of Austerfeld, and you can see it's about halfway between London and Edinburgh. It's in Yorkshire. It's in a very rural part of Yorkshire. It's basically farmers who have small plots of grain and sheep and cows and pigs. And you see the village of Austerfield there? Its population in 1590 was 536. Its population now is 536. In fact, if you can see it on that map there, There's one street and fields behind the houses. So that's Bradford's background. His father dies within a year of his birth, and his mother dies 3 years later. So by the time he's 7, he's an orphan. Now, his mother's brothers took him in and raised him. They raise sheep. They're good Yorkshiremen. They have flocks of sheep out in the hill. He grows up as a shepherd. But he's also attracted to, he hears about this group of Christians who are meeting privately in an estate that's the only manor of the only nobleman in the area, William Brewster. He'd actually been at the court of Elizabeth for a while. And he's hosting weekly services on his estate. And Bradford starts going when he's in his early teens. He has to walk 3 miles each way. It's called Scrooby Manor. So he joins them. From the time he's 12 to the time he's 17, he's illegally attending an unauthorized church gathering every Sunday. And things are not going well. They are detected, they are arrested, they are harassed, they are told they have to conform, and so they make the decision they have no choice but to leave. And so he is 18 years old when the Separatists of North Yorkshire, a little group of no more than about 150, maybe 200, all decide to leave and go to Holland, where there is religious freedom. And it's not easy. Their attempt at escaping England is thwarted, but eventually they do make it. He moves with the group to Leiden. He's young. He takes a job as a weaver, weaving cloth. That's the big trade, and that's sort of the shop trade of Dutch households. Everybody can set up a little loom, and you can take wool and cotton in, and you can weave cloth. Piecework. You get paid by the piece. It's hard work, and you don't really get rich, but you can make enough money to live on. So he learns as a weaver. In 1613, he married Dorothy May, and they have a son around 1617. But there is a crisis amongst this little group of about 200 separatists in the Netherlands. They notice that their kids are learning Dutch and they're stopping to speak. They're no longer speaking English. And they're wanting to go to the Dutch church with their friends. And the Pilgrims wanted to maintain their identity as Englishmen. So they say, in another generation or two, we're going to lose our identity. We're going to be in the melting pot. Our kids are going to be Dutch. And they have a few theological disagreements with the Dutch. It's not huge. The Dutch are Calvinist as well. It's more the Dutch culture and the loss of their identity as Englishmen that troubles them the most. And so they say, and then there's one other thing. The Netherlands are ostensibly ruled by the Habsburg family. They're a part of the Habsburg Empire. And there are rumors that the Habsburgs are going to send troops in and crack down on the Protestants. Indeed, a civil war does break out in Europe between Catholic and Protestant princes in 1618 that lasts for 30 years. And part of it involved the Netherlands. And they're like, okay, our kids are losing their identity, and the freedom we now have looks like it might be a little shaky. We don't know what the Spanish are going to do, but, we could face persecution here. We just ran away from persecution in England, and now it might be happening all over again. So they say, we got to find another place to go. So that leads to their decision. And he's 30 years old now, and married, and has a child, and has a little income from the household weaving operation. And he's not the leader of the group. That it continues to be William Brewster, but he's one of the older established male adults. And he is part of the deliberation and decision to leave the Netherlands and to sail to the New World. They send some representatives back to England. They get a charter in London. They have some connections. They don't have enough money to pay for the whole voyage, but they find a financial investor who will pay for the chartering of the ship and buying of supplies in return for a promise to send back goods from the colony. You can make money basically bringing back timber, because the English, of course, have a huge navy, and there's a constant demand for both warship and merchant ships being built. And the English forests are being cut down and depleted. The forests in North America have virgin timber that are huge. You can cut timber in North America, load it on ships, take it back to England. You can sell it and make money. You can also take furs. And they know there are lots of animals in New England that you can kill and trap for fur and send it back. So the investor's basically saying, I'll charter a ship, I'll buy your supplies, you establish the colony. Every ship that comes and calls on your colony, you fill it up with timber and furs and send it back, and we'll do the accounting until you're paid off. You've paid off my investment. And the Pilgrims agree. So they're, in a sense, all sort of in debt up to their eyeballs to make this trip. When he arrives in Plymouth, and I won't go through all the details of that, you know something of the story, and he wrote an account of it himself. So here are the 100 passengers who landed. Here's the next fall. Of the 100 passengers who landed, 50 died, including the governor. And to succeed the first governor, they elect William Bradford. So he was not their first choice. He was not the senior, and of course, John Alden and Miles Standish are there as well, but he's the governor. And for the rest of his life, he's governor. Now, very sadly, the wife he had married in the Netherlands died before they got through the first winter. He's now a widower. So he marries another passenger, Alice Carpenter, his second wife. By the way, he had left their son John behind in Holland, because this is a small subset. This is only about half of the Separatists. So the other half are going to be coming later. And he and his wife left their son behind to come join them later on. So over the next 22 years, he's reelected governor annually. A couple of brief gaps there, but he is the leader of the colony. And he writes an account. It's not found. He writes it in the 1630s. Here we go. This is literally dog-eared. That's the result of an encounter with a literal dog. Okay, so this is his account. Now, it was completed but lost. It wasn't discovered until 1839. But it's his account of sort of what happened in the years he was governor of the colony. It's fascinating reading. The colony never really takes off in population. As people arrive from England, the little settlement on the promontory sort of spins out people who go and find farms. And so there's kind of a series of rural farms around Plymouth. Plymouth itself never gets more than a couple hundred people in it, but there are probably 300 or 400 other people living in farms scattered within walking distance of it. There's some back and forth, some religious dissent, but by and large, Bradford remains their leader, and he guides them through the encounter with the larger group that starts coming in 1630 and landing just north of Plymouth, founding Salem, Charlestown, and Boston. In the 1640s, he kind of goes into semi-retirement, and he dies in 1657, sorry. He's buried on Burial Hill. That manuscript of Plymouth Plantation he left behind unfinished, and thankfully found it, and it's been published and available to us. So yeah, here's the story of the passengers. We've talked about that. I'll just show you because, hey, it's my personal interest. I'm descended from those two. I'm descended from John Holland and Elizabeth Tilley. So is George Bush. So, and I never got invited to the White House. So, what can I say? All right, I need to tell you a little bit about one of the really interesting parts of this, Samoset and Squanto. Most of us get everything we know about the Pilgrims because they taught us about Thanksgiving when we were in second and third and fourth and fifth and sixth grade. And we always talk about the Indians helping the Pilgrims, helping them understand how to plant and what things grow well, and that they, in the second fall, because they arrived the first fall. They got a late start from England. They should have sailed in the spring. Problems with the boats, problems with buying supplies. They should have gotten off in May or June, and 8 weeks later landed and had time to put in a crop before the winter came. They got off late, not till October. They didn't land till November. No chance to grow any food. The ship stayed anchored off the coast and shared supplies with them, but they still died. Some of the sailors on the ship died. That's the terrible first winter. So they come around to the second winter. Well, they've had a chance to plant and to harvest, so they have a huge celebration. And one of the reasons they're able to have a huge celebration is because they've had the assistance of these two Indians. And I need to tell their story because it's recorded actually by Bradford and remarked upon by him as another example of the providence of God. So these two Indians spoke English, which was remarkable and startled the Pilgrims. They came out of the woods and said, "Hello, English." And the Puritans are grabbing their guns going, "What?" So about 3 or 4 years before the Pilgrims arrived, 1616, these two Indians were down along the shore. There was an English fishing fleet because they had been coming every year. So this coastline was well known. There were fleets that sailed out of the west coast of England because there's great fishing in the Newfoundland banks. And it's another way to make money. A fishing vessel out of the western ports of England could sail to the coast of North America, catch fish, pull up on the beach, lay out all the fish and let them dry in the sun, load the dried fish into the cargo hold because they weigh a lot less when they're dried than when they're freshly expired and full of water, and sail back to England, and you could make money. They came every year because it was good money. Not all of the captains and crew were entirely upright and noble individuals, however. Some of them supplemented the money they made taking fish back by kidnapping Indians and selling them as slaves. So Samoset and Squanto, who were friends, were down walking along the beach. They saw the English fishermen. They waved. The English fishermen rushed up, grabbed them, threw them in the ship, and took them and sold them in a slave market in Spain. Now here's where the providence of God gets interesting. In Spain, there were Jesuit monks who had taken as part of their mission to care for the poor and the orphan, had adopted as their mission purchasing slaves in the slave market to set them free. So the Jesuit monks in Spain, this little group of them, purchased Samoset and Squanto in the slave market and were able to get, enough communication going that they figured out, where they were from and how they got there. The English ship had stopped on the way back to England, the slave market. You couldn't sell them as slaves in England, but you could sell them in Spain. So they arranged for Samoset and Squanto to get passage to London, where they stayed for a year, housed in a Christian household where they both learned English. And from there, they went to the fishing fleet, and this is like almost an odd sort of 17th century underground railroad. The people who were cooperating with the Jesuits and the people who'd housed these two Indians kind of knew which captains could be trusted and which couldn't. And they put them on a ship with a captain who could be trusted, who took them back and returned them to the shores of North America. Now, here's where the story gets even more interesting. In their absence, a plague had struck their tribe. and every single member of their tribe had perished. They came back to their village, and it was abandoned. They were the only two survivors because they hadn't been there when disease struck. So they're kind of living on their own in the woods, and here come the Pilgrims, and they look up. This is not in your second grade textbook. Samoset is the first one to notice. He comes out of the tree line, sees the Pilgrims, and says, "Hello, English. Have you got any beer?" Because he'd kind of acquired a taste. He had been to the pub. "Hello, English. Do you have any?" Because the Indians didn't brew beer. "Have you got any beer?" And of course they did, because they were Puritans. They were not Baptists. They were Puritans or Pilgrims. They were definitely not Baptists. So Squanto then, he runs and tells Squanto and says, "Hey, there's English settlers. These are not fishermen. They're staying, and they're settling in the area where our tribe used to be," which is why Samoset and Squanto decided we might as well go live with them. There's a new tribe here. It's the area we know. We can help them. And so Squanto, for a couple of years, tragically, he does not spend more than 2 or 3 years. He dies. But he teaches them how to farm in New England. He teaches them how to hunt game in New England. He translates for them with the surrounding tribes and sends the invitations for the big celebration. And he lives with them. So it's just, and Bradford records all of this as an example of the marvelous providences of God. So that's the story. Back to this. Now I get to the other side. Now we need to talk about Winthrop and his big fleet. So it's not just James who's his disappointment. James dies in 1625, and he has a son, Charles. He's King of England from 1625. He's 25 years old. And there might have been some hope that maybe when James died, we could, complete the Reformation of the church in England. Charles was worse than James. Charles has a Catholic wife. He married a French princess who is Roman Catholic. And he supports church rule by bishops in uniformity. And he is quite impatient and gets along very poorly with Parliament. And so from 1628 to 1640, he refuses to allow Parliament to meet. And he starts arbitrarily raising taxes, which are not authorized, but he's got his lawyers searching through the history books saying, what taxes could the king revive that he doesn't need parliamentary approval for? And that's what pushes the Puritans over the edge, is the fact that James has died and things are not getting better, they're getting worse. We could go back to Bloody Mary. I mean, how are their children going to be raised? Henrietta Maria has her own Catholic priest, a chaplain, in the palace who's conducting a mass every day. Who's going to raise the kids? Are we going to go back to Bloody Mary? So, as if James's relations were bad enough, Charles's are worse. So let's talk about Winthrop. Winthrop, born in 1588, so he's actually only 2 years older than Bradford. He's from Suffolk, not from Yorkshire. He's from the south of England, and he's from a wealthy family. That's the manor. Groton Manor, still standing, where his father was a quite prosperous yeoman farmer and a lawyer, university trained and London trained at the Inns of Court. Gentry. So young John, at the age of 15, goes to Cambridge, attends Trinity College, which has very strong Puritan ties. And he goes to London and studies law, preparing for a career as a lawyer. He's married at age 17 to Mary Forth, who was also wealthy. And they had 6 children over 10 years. And she died in childbirth. So he's now 27 with 6 children. So he marries again Thomasina Clopton. She died the next year, giving birth to a daughter. So now he's been twice widowed, still has 6 children from his first marriage. He marries a third time, 1618, Margaret Tyndall. She and John have a long-lasting marriage. But I think these events of his early life are important to understand because you see his background. You see the social strata that he is born into, his education at university, his training as a lawyer. His father is a local magistrate. He becomes a local magistrate. They had 6 children together, and she sailed to Massachusetts the same year, but not in the same group of ships that he did, and joined him. And some of the children from his first marriage came with him. The children, one of the reasons she stayed behind is she was pregnant. And she stayed behind until she had given birth. That child died, but then she came with the other children. So in the 1610s, John had already taken over the management of his father's estates. He's 20 years old, and he's sort of running his father's farm, handling tenants, finances, local disputes, household staff. He started serving as a justice of the peace in local government. Very different experience from Bradford. Worked as an attorney in the Court of Wards in London, and that court was resolving disputes over estates and orphaned heirs. He understood not only English politics, but also the law. It also exposed him to the corruption of the law in the courts in London, which fueled his disillusionment. Around 1623, he underwent a deep religious transformation. It's documented in his spiritual diary. He grappled with guilt over sin and sought assurance of his salvation. And in the area where he was growing up, there were a group of Puritan ministers who had managed to preserve a more thorough Protestant Reformed practice. They preached from the Word. They conducted simple services. They were a low church as opposed to high church. And they were disturbed when it looked as though the government might force them to become high church. That's what led to the founding of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So he joined Puritan networks in East Anglia. This is where most of the Massachusetts Bay settlers came from, whereas the Pilgrims came from Yorkshire. Massachusetts Bay folks came from East Anglia. Yeah, he's frustrated. Bishop Laud, who's cracking down on nonconformists, is alarming him. He had some financial troubles in the 20s. He had to sell some land to stay afloat. 1629, he makes the decision. He joins the Massachusetts Bay Company, which is a Puritan-led venture to establish a colony. He was elected governor because he was experienced, a lawyer, a landowner, with, I think, 8 or 9 children at that point. And he was committed to lead the migration. He played a key role in organizing the company, securing the charter, and the charter specifically stated that the colonists would be governing themselves in the New World, which was unusual for a colonial venture. So 1630, Winthrop, his family, about 700 other Puritans, set sail on a fleet of 11 ships, marking the start of the Great Migration. Another 10,000 Puritans came over the next 10 years. And it's because of this. It's because of the incomplete nature of the Reformation and the frustration with James and the alarm with Charles. Charles seemed to them to threaten a reversal of the Reformation. It wasn't just that they might lose their freedom, it was that England might go back and rejoin the Catholic Church, and they wanted to be somewhere else. So I don't have a lot of time left, but I wanted to give you a taste of Winthrop. I'll point you to Bradford's account of the plantation if you want to know more about him. Winthrop preaches a very famous sermon. Now, he's not a pastor, but he is a lawyer, and he's reasonably eloquent and a good writer. And as they are preparing to sail, this fleet of 11 ships, he gathers all 1,000 of the colonists before they left England, and he preaches a sermon to them. And I just want to read you the end. He says, we face a lot of difficulties. We face a lot of dangers. We face the possibility of shipwreck, both literally and metaphorically. We could make a shipwreck of this colony if we don't work together diligently, if we don't seek to obey God's leading, if we don't treat each other well and kindly. He says the only way to avoid this shipwreck and to provide for our posterity is to follow the counsel of Micah, to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with our God. For this end, we must be knit together in this work as one man. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of our superfluities for the supply of others' necessities. We must uphold a familiar commerce together in all meekness, gentleness, patience, and liberality. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own, rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work. As members of the same body, so shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. The Lord will be our God and delight to dwell among us as his own people, and will command a blessing upon us in all our ways, so that we shall see much more of his wisdom, power, goodness, and truth than formerly we have been acquainted with. We shall find that the God of Israel is among us, when 10 of us shall be able to resist 1,000 of our enemies, when he shall make us a praise and glory, that men shall say of succeeding plantations, the Lord, make it like that of New England. For we must consider, we shall be as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us, so that if we shall deal falsely with our God in this work that we have undertaken, and so cause him to withdraw his present help from us, we shall be made a story and a byword through the world. We shall open the mouths of enemies to speak evil of the ways of God and all professors for God's sake. We shall shame the faces of many of God's worthy servants and cause their prayers to be turned into curses upon us, till we be consumed out of the good land whither we are going. This is a famous city set on a hill speech. But it's not an expression of manifest destiny. I hope you heard exactly what he was saying. He's not saying God has chosen us as a special people. We're going to be a light to the world. Jesus' parable doesn't say that we're going to shine because of who we are. Jesus' parable of the city set on a hill is that the world is going to be watching you because you're called by my name. You haven't set yourself anywhere, and I haven't set you up someplace special. But because you are called by my name, the world is going to be watching you, and they will draw conclusions about the nature of God by what they see in you. So the parable that Jesus told, which is that all Christians are a city set on a hill, Winthrop takes this and tells the colonists, you, like every other Christian, and you especially as a community now going to a new world to build a place, you are going to be a city set on a hill like every other Christian is, and the rest of the world's going to be watching how you treat each other and what you do. I'll finish just with his last paragraph here. I shall shut up this discourse with that exhortation of Moses, that faithful servant of the Lord, in his last farewell to Israel, Deuteronomy 30. Beloved, there is now set before us life and good, death and evil, in that we are commanded this day to love the Lord our God and to love one another, to walk in his ways and to keep his commandments and his ordinance and his laws and the article of our covenant with him, that we may live and be multiplied, and that the Lord our God may bless us in the land whither we go to possess. But if our hearts shall turn away, so that we will not obey, but shall be seduced and worship and serve other gods, our pleasure and profits, and serve them, it is propounded unto us this day, we shall surely perish out of the good land whither we pass over this vast sea to possess. Therefore, let us choose life, that we and our seed may live by obeying his voice and cleaving to him, for he is our life and our prosperity. That sermon, by the way, quoted by John F. Kennedy. He makes a speech in Massachusetts and he quotes Winthrop's City Set on a Hill. Ronald Reagan used the imagery of City Set on a Hill. Barack Obama used the City Set on a Hill imagery in his speech. Mitt Romney used it in his acceptance speech. Ted Cruz has used it on the campaign trail. Winthrop continues to echo. Now, part of that is the image of a city set on a hill is biblical. It's from the Gospel of Matthew. But it's been applied to the American experiment. So yeah, Winthrop's career, they're building homes and churches and fortifications. They're welcoming and settling new arrivals. They have to deal with dissenters. I could spend a lot of time talking about this. Anne Hutchinson is not the champion of free speech. She's a church lady who's trying to stir up dissension in the congregation. She thinks her husband and her brother-in-law should have been appointed pastors. And so she starts a little study group to criticize the sermons that are being preached by the pastors in the churches because she thinks they should be set aside and her husband and her brother-in-law should be the pastor of those churches. And they put up with this for about a year and then they say, you have to leave. And they banish her. She's not a martyr of free speech. I'm sorry. She's one of those church ladies. What can I say? Roger Williams is a little bit of a different story. He does not banish. He leaves because he disagrees with some of the practices of the church in Massachusetts Bay Colony, founds Rhode Island, but he and Winthrop maintained a friendship and a correspondence over the years. There's actually an alliance between the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the Plymouth Colony and the Rhode Island Colony and the New Haven Colony for mutual self-defense. He writes a legal code. He's a participant in the founding of Harvard. His wife, his long beloved wife, dies in June of 1647. And in December, he married again to Martha Rainsborough, who was the widow of an army captain who had fought against Charles I. He was 59, she was 35. They had one child, but died young, not in infancy, but in childhood. So here's the epilogue. Bradford is governor of the Plymouth Plantation for 37 years. Winthrop is the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony for 29 years. They overlapped. Bradford actually outlived him. They formed a New England Confederation. Plymouth grew by 1650, so by 1640, 1,000. By 1650, maybe 2,500. Massachusetts Bay Colony, 20,000. 1686, James II, after the restoration of the monarchy in England, sought to combine all the colonies under a single royal governor. That alarmed them quite a bit. He was overthrown in the Glorious Revolution. William and Mary granted a new royal colony, but it combined Plymouth Colony, Massachusetts Bay Colony, and Maine into Massachusetts. Maine gets separated off later in the 1800s and admitted as a separate state, but Plymouth Colony, Massachusetts Bay Colony, and Maine then become a single colony. It's, of course, long after the death of both Bradford and Winthrop. So, that's the story. Ooh, I finished 2 minutes early. I'm going to tease you a little bit. I haven't announced it yet, but I'm going to do it now. We are going to continue next 3 months, same thing, second Tuesday of each month. I'm going to do in April, Alexander the Great, and in May, Herod the Great, and in June, Charles the Great. So it's the greats for the next 3 months. So Alexander is 356 to 323 BC. Herod the Great, 73 BC to 4 BC. And I think I've about got it all sorted out. It's very confusing, but it's very significant because, of course, this is the Herod under whose reign Jesus was born. And then Charlemagne, 742 to 814. So we'll do all of that over the next 3 months. And I'm kind of excited. I'm looking forward to doing my research on all this. Questions about Bradford, Winthrop, John Howland, Elizabeth Tilley, Miles Standish, John Alden? It's all those stories weaved together there. I hope I helped you understand the context of them and their understanding of themselves as Englishmen who had no choice but to leave. At great cost, great danger. And those who came with them, yeah, it was hard. All right. Thank you. We'll end it there. Feel free to come up, wander around, take a look at the books, the charts. And I'm very proud of my membership certificates in the John Howland Society and the Mayflower Society.